Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Pick Six Podcast Mock Draft Show. Another week in the books. The regular season is officially over for the NFL. So it is, as far as I'm concerned, officially draft season. It's me, Ryan Wilson, joined by Josh Edwards and Chris Trapasso, as always. And we're going to talk a little team needs now that the draft order is set, barring any trades. And I don't know, hopefully be some trades. I don't think anyone's trading up to number one. We'll worry about that when we get to that point. Remember, you can subscribe to the old podcast via YouTube. That's youtube.com/pick6. Hit the old subscription button, hit the bell notification so you know every time we go live. We will continue to go live after every playoff game. And I would imagine we're going to start going live for free agency and other sort of off-season craziness. You can also listen to us on Spotify. And if you do listen to us on Spotify, leave us a 5-star rating. That would make Will Brinson very happy. Those hair plugs do not pay for themselves. All right, Chris, Josh, draft order. This whole podcast is me saying 2 words at a time with an exclamation point after it, and then you just have to answer. All right, let's go. First up, the old Jaguars. Jaguars outdid themselves. They won a football game. It was a very consequential game, by the way, in Week 18. They beat the Colts, who needed to. All they had to do was beat the Jaguars, go to the playoffs. Somehow helped the Steelers backdoor the way to the playoffs. I think the Steelers had a 10% chance to make the playoffs before Sunday's action started. The Jaguars won. The Lions won. So the draft order stays put at 1 and 2. I love the Lions and what they're doing. I sort of wanted to lose that game so they could get the first overall pick just for us mixing it up in terms of what we talk about. But that didn't happen. Jaguars, Trapasso, I'll start with you. What are their biggest needs?
Yeah, I mean, I think offensive line and mostly offensive tackle is the biggest need, most clear-cut need. Cam Robinson was their franchise player this year, and it was kind of indicative of everything that went wrong with the Urban Meyer era, that it began with them deciding to tag Cam Robinson, who was not a good left tackle to begin with. Evan Neal would make a lot of sense. I think with a new coach and maybe a new GM, they could certainly not really care about the fact that they drafted Caleb Chase 2 drafts ago. They have Josh Allen there up front, so it wouldn't be a terrible idea to look at Kayvon Thibodeau or Aiden Hutchinson just because of the positional value. But offensive and defensive lines, to me, are the biggest needs. Even if they wanted to go way outside the box and look at Kyle Hamilton or Derek Stingley, if they really like those players because they're playing decently valuable positions and are marquee prospects, I wouldn't hate that. Although it would be, I guess, a little weird if a cornerback went number 1 overall. So I think Evan Neal at this point or any of the other top offensive linemen have to be the most in the Jaguars' crosshairs at number 1 overall.
Yeah, the thing is, cornerback is indeed a need, corner CB.
Yeah.
And they traded C.J. Henderson. Again, Urban Meyer leaving his mark on the way out the door. I think we all like C.J. Henderson, his first-round pick last year. I have no idea if he's going to be good or not because they didn't really play him a whole lot, and then they moved on from him. Josh, you're not trading. Like no one's trading up for this pick as is. Is there any sort of package the Jaguars could put together? Maybe a Caleb Chase, for example, and have to throw in a second-round pick or something to move down to do the math for them to move in order to move down. Is that something they should even consider?
I mean, I think it would be a good year to do it if you were comfortable with the amount of talent that was available. Obviously, if you've got 5 blue chip players on your board, you're not going to move back to number 6 because then you kind of put yourself in a precarious situation. So if you feel confident in this top billing of prospects, maybe you've got 5 or so similarly rated, then yeah, you can investigate possibly moving down a little bit. But like we've talked about previously, I think it's going to be tough for anybody at the top of this draft order to find suitors willing to move up.
Yeah, it's going to be incredibly hard. And the fact that I'm trying to come up with scenarios in which they trade a first-round pick to move down, you still have to win the trade if you're the Jaguars, obviously, but you're not going to get the draft haul you might get, say, if it were last year or the year before that. All right, so let's move on to the Lions. I mentioned they had a chance to get that first overall pick, and that would have been fun for us because then we could just say, okay, Aiden Hutchinson or Kayvon Thibodeau or whatever, and then the Jaguars could take an offensive lineman at 2, and you'd feel better about it. If you're the Lions, it feels like, Josh, I'll just circle back with you, that quarterback's off the board. They have 2 first-round picks. Maybe you consider one at the bottom of the first round. But if you're the Lions here, what are you doing, given that I would imagine Jared Goff, I'm going to get this eventually, feels like the guy at least for next year?
Yeah, I think edge rusher makes the most sense. One of those guys that we've talked about, whether it's Kayvon Thibodeau, whether it's Aiden Hutchinson, maybe it's Purdue's George Karlaftis. any one of those three guys could be the direction that Detroit decides to go. I will say, with the way that Jeff Okudah has played thus far, maybe you give Derek Stingley a little bit of consideration there at number 2 overall. But I think in all likelihood, you're probably leaning towards one of those edge rushers.
Yeah, I mean, Jeffrey Okudah, we've talked about before, struggled with injuries. Ife Melifonwu, who I liked a lot, played pretty well once he was healthy. They have Oruwariye out of Penn State, who flashed at times this year. So I think that's a consideration. Wide receivers a consideration. I don't think this high. Although I think, Josh, you mentioned, we were talking yesterday, you had Jameson Williams going top 10 prior to the injury. So, never say never. Again, I'll ask you, Traps, this question I just asked Josh. If you're the Lions here, I feel like there's a better chance you could trade down, especially if a team loves Thibodeau or Hutchinson. Maybe not so much for a quarterback, but we'll see what happens. If you're the Lions here, how far are you willing to move down if a team wants to come up and get one of those edge rushers, for example?
Yeah, I'm going to go with kind of what Josh said. Like, I wouldn't move back much further than pick 6 or pick 7 because I feel like that's where there is a drop-off from the elite prospects in this draft class. And if Evan Neal goes number 1 overall, if it's Ike Ekwonu, if it's Charles Cross, if the Jaguars do go offensive line, the Lions will probably get some calls because I think Aiden Hutchinson, given his size, his productivity, the pass rush move arsenal, and then Kayvon Thibodeau just being the athletic freak that he is, there'll be teams calling to be interested in moving up. And it would kind of work out that they wouldn't probably be getting a crazy big offer from a team, picking in the teens. But if a team at number 6, at number 7 overall wants to move up, I think the Lions, a team that certainly played better down the stretch. We all love the enthusiasm of Dan Campbell, and they lost a bunch of close games earlier this season.
A ton.
A ton. So they could be a lot better next year. They still have a lot of needs. So I think moving to that 6 or 7 range makes the most sense. One other position that I don't think is completely out of the question, safety. And Kyle Hamilton, Josh's guy. Tracy Walker is a pretty good safety. He's set to hit free agency. There are other safeties, Will Harris. That's a position that is a clear weak spot on this roster. If for some reason they move back, or if Aiden Hutchinson goes number 1 and they don't love Kayvon Thibodeau, Kyle Hamilton had he not gotten hurt, we would be talking about him as a top 3 overall player, like consensus to go inside the top 3. So safety is not out of the realm of possibility at number 2 overall, because I think if he is healthy, if he does get to test it all at the Notre Dame Pro Day, we will see that Kyle Hamilton is an elite, not only prospect, but an elite athlete that can play multiple positions in Detroit's defense.
Let me ask you this, Trap, since you mentioned top 3 safety for Kyle. I'm just racking my brain quickly, and Josh helped me as well. Ed Reed, Troy Polamalu, and retroactively, 2 guys I would take top 5. Honey Badger, no. Is there anyone else that I'm missing that's worth a top 5 pick as a safety? Like Sean Taylor, yes, but clearly his career was cut short. I think that's the guy you mentioned, but I just wonder, we talk about like running backs, obviously not being, unless you're Dave Gettleman, not necessarily worth taking that high. I wonder if there's some flexibility there in terms of how much you value the safety position, even though Kyle Hamilton is a home run.
Yeah, I don't value it like as one of the top 3 or 4 positions in terms of value, but I think the Lions could sell it to their fan base and say, look, we're not just drafting a deep middle of the field safety. This is a safety, a linebacker, a slot corner, a lot more fluid than Isaiah Simmons, who went in the first round a couple years ago. With Kyle Hamilton, you're not just getting a one positional player, and it's a defense that needs linebacker too, needs slot corner, needs safety. You could kind of sell it as, hey, we just drafted someone that will play multiple roles in our defense and has the high caliber size and athleticism to match up with tight ends, with slot corners, be very good against the run. So this is kind of a different type of safety in Kyle Hamilton. Yeah,
no, I say that knowing full well that Kyle Hamilton has consistently gone in my top 10. Josh, the Texans, again, like the Lions, I feel like Davis Mills is their guy. And, we talked about this yesterday as well. Davis Mills comes back. He's the first quarterback taken, I feel like, had to return to Stanford. So what are the Texans doing at 3? Again, by the way, shout out to Jackie Easterby and Nick Caserio. This is the most dysfunctional franchise on the planet, and they somehow have flown under the radar thanks to Urban Meyer, thanks to now what's going on with the Giants. What are you doing if you're Houston?
Yeah, I actually think it's kind of remarkable that David Culley was able to get to 4 wins with that roster. I think the best method moving forward is to stick with Davis Mills and give him another season. I think he played well enough down the stretch to be given that opportunity. I also don't think there's a quarterback that you would want to jump at taking at number 3 overall. And depending on how the trade market sorts out with obviously the Deshaun Watson situation and all of those other guys that may be available, perhaps that changes. But I think probably the best outlet for them is to give Mills another season, use some of this early draft capital to supplement the roster around that position. So maybe you look at the offensive line like you've got here with Ike Ekwonu. Maybe you go back to the defensive side of the ball and you try to get one of those edge rushers, because Houston has a history of taking guys early in the first round at that position, whether it was J.J. Watt, whether it was Mario Williams, Jadeveon Clowney. There's definitely been some guys in the organization that have been taken high in the draft.
So as we sit here, Traps, the Texans have 4 top 100 picks, 4 top 80 picks, if we're being honest, 3 and 37. They're going to get perhaps 3 more first-round picks of some description when they get rid of Deshaun Watson. Is this a spot where you trade down and get even more picks to restock a roster that's going to have a lot of holes?
It wouldn't surprise me, given Nick Caserio's time in New England with Bill Belichick, and a lot of those teams throughout the prime Tom Brady era were kind of filled in by Bill Belichick, like trading out of the first round completely, having multiple trade backs in a given draft. And I think Bill Belichick kind of understood, like, hey, even me, I'm not going to be able to draft these players a lot better than anyone else. I'm just going to get more roles at the table. So if Caserio learned that from Bill Belichick, it wouldn't shock me. It's a roster that has a ton of holes. Really, the one player that's young that looks like he could be a star is Jonathan Grenard, the edge rusher. Davis Mills, like we said, kind of flashed a little bit. Brandon Cooks is good, but he's older. Nico Collins flashed a little. But really, offensive line, defensive line, linebacker, secondary, they have so many holes that you can't really say, hey, they need to go offensive tackle here or they have to go edge rusher. They should just be picking the best player on their board, regardless of position, with those early picks.
No cornerbacks under contract is here beyond the 2022 season.
Insane.
Yeah. Well, hey, way to go, Jack Easterby. All right, the Jets, they have pick 4. They have pick 10. They have 5 picks in the top 69 picks. And, it's fun to pencil in Evan Neal here if he's available. But the reality is George Fant didn't play that bad. He only has 1 year left on his deal. So if you're okay with him, Mekhi Becton's going to come back healthy. Elijah Vera Tucker, they drafted in the first round. But I keep coming back to this, and Traps, will start with you. Just protect Zach Wilson and see what you have. What are your thoughts if you're the Jets here at 4?
Yeah, it's got to be offensive line. I mean, it's kind of the opposite of the Texans, that they need to have a zeroed-in philosophy on offensive line. And fortunately for them, I mean, there's 3 blockers that we all like as kind of top 10 picks, where if they wanted to say, hey, maybe it's a little bit of a reach to pick Charles Cross or Ike Ekwonu, we're fine with that. Build that offensive line around Zach Wilson, not just because that's what you should do for any young quarterback, but in Zach Wilson's breakout season at BYU, he was hardly pressured. That was a play-action bootleg-based system, similar to what he has with the Jets, but it was a great offensive line. Brady Christensen was there, who got picked on day 2 or day 3 last year by the Carolina Panthers. It was a good front. So to allow Zach Wilson to continue to flash like he did a little bit in December and early January, you need to just keep investing up front. And we all know that Joe Douglas, from his time in Philadelphia, understands the benefits and how much success you can have from having a very good offensive line.
So I actually posed this question to someone in a NFL front office, and I said exactly what I've been saying for months now. If you have a franchise quarterback or even a replacement level quarterback, it doesn't make sense to have a crappy offensive line around him. So what do you think of this theory? Put all your chips in free agency and the draft, and just draft offensive linemen to protect this guy, even if it means you have average skill position players. And the response I got was, I understand what you're saying, but here's the thing: like, the offensive linemen, they're not making plays, they're not catching touchdowns, they're not running through the hole, they're not throwing lasers down the field. So you have to balance that. But at the end of the day, the play's not going to work if you can't protect the quarterback. So I think that the bottom line is, yeah, I get what you're saying. I don't know if you use 100% of your resources on offensive line, but perhaps more than half your resources to protect the quarterback does make some sense. So I get it. Josh, let me ask you about the Giants. So with Joe Judge, I just figured Daniel Jones was going to be the guy. Now that Judge and Gettleman are gone, number one, are you thinking about a quarterback here at 5 or pick 7, which you also have? Number 2, would you trade? So they have picks 5, 7, 36, and 67. Would you trade picks 5 and 7 for Deshaun Watson? Like, would you go that far outside the box, or maybe 5 and 7 for Russ Wilson if he wants to be in a big market? Offensive line is clearly a need, but maybe you can feel those out with the remaining free agency, draft picks. Excuse me. The Giants here. Which direction are you going?
I would probably consider trading for Russell Wilson or Deshaun Watson with one of those picks. I wouldn't be too, interested in giving up both of them because those are both top 10 picks. I mean, we talk about the weakness in this draft class possibly being the amount of blue chip players, but top 10 picks are top 10 picks. So that carries more weight than if you were to trade a middle of the first round, a second half of the first round pick, which Houston might be getting in return for Deshaun Watson. I mean, we don't know what kind of trade packages they're looking at. So I would certainly look to upgrade the quarterback position if that was an option. I also would not be surprised if they just run it back with Daniel Jones, because you're kind of victim to the options that are available to you, whether it's through free agency or the draft. You may not feel that any of these draft prospects are an upgrade over Daniel Jones, and you may not have the opportunity to trade for one of those quarterbacks. We don't know how it's going to play out. So I could see any of these situations playing out, and it's obviously going to – the most important thing is who they hire as the head coach, because I'm sure that coach had some kind of a preconceived notion of Daniel Jones, and that's going to be what it comes down to at the end of the day.
Yeah, we've talked about this before. Like, is Daniel Jones worse than Kenny Pickett? No, that's the thing. And Josh, Traps, who did you have the Giants drafting in your latest mock draft? Was it Kenny?
I had Kenny Pickett. That was right before Joe Judge got fired. I thought he would just be a Joe Judge type of guy. He's from New Jersey. It's without knowing who the head coach is now. I think it's pretty hard to peg, but they absolutely have to take a long, hard look at the quarterback spot, whether it be via trade or with one or either of these first-round picks.
Now, let's be fair for a second, though, because he has been working with Jason Garrett and Freddie Kitchens for a couple of years. So there is some grace that needs to be thrown in the direction of Daniel Jones.
100%. No, that's right. That's right. I just did Baltimore Radio before we came on here, and they were laughing that the Ravens dodged a bullet because Jason Garrett didn't want the Ravens job before they hired John Harbaugh. So, it worked out for Baltimore, didn't work out for the Cowboys and subsequently the Giants. That's right. So we'll see. And here's the thing. Let's say they draft Kenny Pickett 5, which feels like an overdraft, just like it felt like with Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones will get a chance to be a starter probably next season if that's the reality, because there's not so few, but there aren't enough quality NFL starters at the quarterback position. All right, so let's keep the ball going here, Traps. In terms of the Panthers, another team very much like the Giants in terms of you got to fix the offensive line, but your quarterback situation is actually, it's way worse than the Giants, in my opinion. What are you doing if you're the Panthers at 6? And it feels like David Tepper is the type of impulsive owner who would trade 4 first-round picks for Deshaun Watson. Is he willing to sit pat here? Could he be the first owner willing to trade up to get a quarterback? What do you think?
I think they have to go quarterback or offensive line. And I agree with you, Ryan. Like, it doesn't make any sense to have any quarterback, especially a young one, if your offensive line is not good. And the Panthers' offensive line was not very good this season. But I think, and this will be controversial on this little 3-man panel, they should pick Malik Willis. And I think Malik Willis is the only quarterback in this draft that a team should trade up for. I like Kenny Pickett. I somewhat agree that he's similar to Daniel Jones. I don't think he turns the ball over as much, but he's not a supreme talent, a supreme athlete with a crazy arm. Neither is Matt Corral, Desmond Ridder, Sam Howell in that second tier. Malik Willis is crazy raw, but the talent is of, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert caliber. It's not as good as those players, but eventually, if you build around him, if the coaching is good, he can make some of those throws and those off-structure plays that we're seeing from the league's best young quarterback. So if you're the Panthers, you've re-signed Cam Newton, you traded for Sam Darnold, you have PJ Walker taking snaps. I think they should really think about Malik Willis. And of course, similar to the Giants, this will all come down to what happens Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, and Deshaun Watson. If either of those teams, the Giants, the Panthers, any other club, the Steelers potentially, maybe the Saints I've heard for Russell Wilson, cannot land them, then they need to think about Malik Willis. And I think you're right. David Tepper could be the guy that says, let's greenlight a trade up for this guy that we know will take time to develop, but has the skills that we're seeing from some of the best quarterbacks in the league.
My only concern about the Panthers, well, there are many concerns, but the concerns about and Malik Willis thing, you're exactly right in terms of being that probably the biggest upside guy. The Panthers have pick 6 and then pick 105. And so they have no way of fixing the offensive line except through free agency. And whoever's back there next year is in for a beatdown if they don't address that. But I understand exactly what you're saying. So let's skip pick 7 because that's the Giants. We just talked about them. Josh, come back to you with another. This is a quarterback conversation. And when many of these picks 5 to 10 here, 5 to 11 as I look at it, 5 to 12, 5 to 13. All right, there we go. So pick 8, Falcons. Matt Ryan still do a ton of money next year. Bring it back if you want. It doesn't matter. You can have someone sit behind him. Or are you more concerned with addressing the defense if you're Arthur Smith and or blank?
Yeah, back to the Panthers just real quick. That feels like a team that is probably going to use their first-round pick on a quarterback, whether it's actually drafting one of these players or using it as a trade chip in a trade for a veteran. And Malik Willis is probably the best equipped to, run for his life behind that offensive line.
Sure.
As for the Falcons, Matt Ryan, with the state of his contract, he's coming back next year, like you said. So perhaps you bring in a young player to learn behind Matt Ryan for a year before you eventually turn over the reins. I think that's a good option, especially because if you don't have the quarterback solution, in-house, then you're always going to have questions about the future of your organization. So you kind of have to address that first before you worry about the defense, because if you don't have a guy that you have confidence in moving forward, then you're kind of wasting a year or two of this talent that you're cultivating on defense. So you would like to have that guy in the building, especially to be able to learn from Matt Ryan. I think that's a great situation.
No, I think that's right. That team, if you look at the record, every one of their wins was one-score wins, and I believe every one of their losses was double-digit losses. Their record masked how far they may be from being a competitor again. But hey, whatever. They won the games they won. It was impressive they were in the race as deep into the season as they were. All right, Traps, let's talk about the Broncos. Vic Fangio, hours before he was given the old pink slip there, said virtually this team needs to have a quarterback to compete in this division, and he wasn't wrong. And I don't know if he was rightly fired or not. I get it. But again, Teddy Bridgewater is, in fact, a bridge quarterback. He's good at that. Drew Lock admitted after the game, and he was very gracious, that he's finally starting to understand the position, the game slowing down for him. Are you rolling with Drew Lock one more year, or are you targeting a quarterback? Are you thinking about something else here?
All right. I was a big fan of Drew Lock, so the draft analyst in me strictly would say, yeah, roll with him one more year. But I would totally understand if Aaron Rodgers is like the front runner to land in Denver, which that's probably where he's the most thought to go at this point, correct? So like, if that's the case, you obviously go with Aaron Rodgers or Deshaun Watson or whatever in that scenario. I don't think, though, any of the other quarterbacks would really excite me way more than Drew Lock would, who's still on a super cheap deal, being a second-round pick. And then if you aren't going to pick a quarterback, I think really any position on the defensive side of the ball, edge rusher, having traded Von Miller, linebacker, they went through a bunch of them last year with a bunch of injuries. You just picked Patrick Surtain, probably not corner, but I don't feel great saying, yeah, go with Drew Lock again. He looked okay down the stretch. This probably will be quarterback, and given his history in Minnesota, their GM George Payton, he's been a part of big splash signings. Trading for Brett Favre, bringing in Kirk Cousins. I think it will be someone that's already in the league, an established veteran and a star at the quarterback spot.
So, Josh, I'll ask you, Drew Lock, or rolling with the guy we spoke with yesterday for the Pick Six podcast, Matt Corral, who I had the Broncos drafting 9th overall. I sort of like Corral on this team. This team isn't that far away. They're in a terrible division, but it's not like they're the Falcons, for example.
Yeah, I would lean towards Corral. I think Traps is kind of where he's where So for him, Sam Darnold is my Drew Lock, I guess
Gotcha.
is a way to put that. So I'm
Okay.
over Drew Lock. I'm done with that experiment. I'm ready to move on, and I think Matt Corral represents an upgrade.
Okay, no, I tend towards that too, and I like Traps was a Drew Lock guy. I liked him a lot coming out. Had small hands. We'll see what that means. Kenny Pickett has smaller hands than Drew Lock. We'll see if people glob onto that as a reason for why you shouldn't take him. All right, pick 10 is the Jets. We talked about the Jets already, so we'll get to pick 11 here, and we'll do a little speed round, 15 to 20 seconds each. We'll just go one analyst for each team as we roll through this thing. Traps, I'll give you football team. So Taylor Heineke wasn't bad. He feels like to me the personification of a good backup. You want a team to win you 3 or 4 games if you need it. What are you doing here? Brandon Scherf's situation remains up in the air, and you could argue that they need some wide receivers as well.
Yeah, this would be a team. I'll kind of start with saying this. That wouldn't surprise me if they fall in love with one of the quarterbacks, could trade up inside the top 10 if they love Malik Willis or they love Matt Corral. Because it feels like, with Taylor Heineke, you have a solid backup that can win you 2 or 3 or 4 games if he's playing for a prolonged period. But Ron Rivera should be trying to find his franchise quarterback at this point, being in Washington for a couple seasons now. So potentially quarterback. Haven't really heard a lot of rumblings about them, on this veteran trade market at the quarterback spot. I think on defense in their secondary, if one of the blue chip guys like a Kyle Hamilton or a Derek Stingley falls a little bit, that would not surprise me if they go in that direction. And you're right, and kind of the same thing with the offensive line. If Ike Ekwonu is still there at number 11, or if Charles Cross isn't as liked by the NFL as much as we like him, that would make a lot of sense because it's kind of been a patchwork group up front. And I don't know how much longer they can afford to have Brandon Scherf on that offensive line. You'd like to just see better offensive tackles. This may too be the first time that we really hear about wide receiver being an option. I know we just lost Jamison Williams from probably being this high of a pick, but Garrett Wilson could certainly be in the equation, even if the Washington football team is hoping for a healthier Curtis Samuel next season.
I actually texted a scout about Jamison Williams because I went on my little rant yesterday about how AstroTurf or Field Turf, whatever it is, sucks and they should get rid of it. And he said Jameson's still a first-round pick for him for sure, although he may end up falling, which isn't, unexpected. We talked about Jeffrey Simmons fell, and he was a top 10 pick, went in the 20s, and he's playing like a top 10 pick. So just the math you have to do. Josh, I'll give you these 2 in a row because I want to hear about 13. But we'll start with the Vikings. Fired the coach, fired the GM. Are you doing a quarterback here? Is Kirby Cousins your guy? This is a team whose the defense was not great. What do you think?
Again, it kind of depends who you bring in as your head coach, the direction that you decide to go. I think it's certainly, worth entertaining a quarterback at this position. Kirk Cousins, I believe, has I wouldn't say it's a manageable amount of cap left on his deal. You're probably going to have to get rid of him. I would guess in some capacity if you decide to bring in another quarterback. If you decide to move forward with Kirk Cousins, I think the best route to take is probably cornerback or edge rusher. They've had some kind of unorthodox issues with the edge rusher position this year. Cornerback has been something that they've tried to solve, to their credit, for a handful of years. I mean, they've used a lot of draft capital on the cornerback position. It just hasn't panned out. So I would certainly understand using a pick on Andrew Booth Jr. I could see them entertaining possibly one of those edge rushers, whether it's David Ojabo from Michigan, whether it's Drake Jackson from USC. And then, again, the quarterback position. Obviously, that was a conversation point last offseason for this team because there were reports that they considered trading up for Justin Fields. So it's been a discussion in Minneapolis, and I think it has to continue to be part of the discussion moving forward.
All right, well, let's get to your Browns, and I want to come back to you on this because, I've been beating the drum on you have to go to a good situation, good offensive line, good defense. They need to add a skill position player or two, but they have 45 tight ends on the roster. I like Kevin Stefanski despite the last 6 weeks of the season where I think he could plead temporary insanity, and no one would argue with that. If Malik Willis is here, and they like Malik Willis, Malik Willis to me feels like a more athletic version of Baker, though he's way less accurate. But again, if you're willing to build a team around him, how would you feel about that?
Well, Willis is definitely an interesting player. I think he would allow them to do a lot of unique things with the run game because that's what the Browns offense is predicated upon is a successful run game. And that was part of the issue this year. When you don't have a quarterback, it makes it more difficult on the running back position. The only thing that I'll say about taking a rookie quarterback, and in this instance, Malik Willis, is that I think the roster is ready to compete. I think if you get the right player in the position, and maybe that just means getting Baker Mayfield healthy. He was obviously good enough to win them games last year, or not lose them games, I guess is a better way to phrase it, last year. Then I think this team has a roster that's capable of returning to the playoffs in short order. So that's my only kind of concern with thrusting a rookie into that starting situation this coming year.
Traps, what do you think? Is this the best landing spot for rookie quarterback in terms of the pieces around him?
Probably. But I will say, with the offensive line being as good as it is and a pretty smart head coach that is going to get the most out of his quarterback, given his time in Minnesota to get the most out of Case Keenum, and then he had Baker Mayfield, I feel like Kevin Stefanski probably has his type, and it wouldn't be a Malik Willis style of player. I think for the Browns, this is where wide receiver has to be a priority. And that if you're going to have this fifth year of Baker Mayfield, you're going to make your final decision on him at some point during the season or at the end of the season. You can't go into the season with Donovan Peoples-Jones, Rashard Higgins, Jarvis Landry, and Anthony Schwartz. You have to add another marquee talent to kind of replace Odell Beckham Jr., whether it be Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, even one of the bigger types like Treylon Burks or Drake London. I think wide receiver should be the spot that they look at and say, hey, this is going to help our team, even though we are a 2 or 3 tight end type offense. We want to see one last time if we can get the most out of Baker Mayfield and if he's really worth a long-term extension.
I'll ask this quickly, and then we really will start doing lightning round here. Josh, would you take Jameson Williams here?
Ooh.
Yeah, absolutely. I would consider Tyler Linderbaum, the Iowa center, here as well. Garrett Wilson from Ohio State. Those would probably be my top 3 for this selection.
You don't care about the ACL either, what I'm hearing.
No, because, with today's modern medicine, technology, rehab, all of that kind of stuff, it's not like the conversation that we would have had maybe a decade ago where you have those legitimate concerns. Ideally, you would like to see him test that explosion to warrant such a high first-round pick, after he returns from injury. But you don't have that luxury, unfortunately, and he's not going to be there with your second-round pick. Like you discussed earlier, Jeffrey Simmons was a top 10 player. He was likely a top 5 caliber player, and he didn't make it out of the 20s. So I think it's very likely that even with the injury, Jameson Williams is still a first-round pick.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right. I'm going to hold you to 25 seconds. Or I'm going to hit the buzzer on you. The Debo's got things to do. All right. Traps. The Ravens, 14. You and I both had them taking cornerback in our mock drafts, I believe. What do you think? They're not moving up for a quarterback. They have Lamar Jackson, and if they want to go the cheap route, they can keep Tyler Huntley. What are you doing if you're the Ravens?
It's got to be one of 2 cornerbacks. And I think in our show that we did yesterday, one of us had Ahmad Gardner from Cincinnati. The other had Kaiir Elam. Those are the 2 press man specialists in Wink Martindale's system. That's the type of cornerback you need to be. And it's kind of like sitting there in their laps. Like that's around where these corners are probably going to be picked. So whichever one they like, I would be completely fine with Sauce Gardner from Cincinnati or Kaiir Elam from Florida.
As the Baltimore radio guys pointed out to me, they can't take Kaiir Elam because they took Jason Elam, right? Not Jason. Jason's the kicker. They took the other Elam from Florida.
Matt Elam.
Who I believe is...
Are they related?
I think they might be his uncle. I have to double check, but that wouldn't be good. That's like the Houston Texans taking Derek Carr after they drafted David Carr.
Yeah.
All right, Josh, the Eagles have both picks 15 and 16, and they have another pick later that has yet to be set because they're in the playoffs. Way to go, Debo. If you're the Eagles here, I think we all have had some combination of 2 to 3 defenders going, and it's just a matter of what you like here. So what are you doing?
This is a team that I think positional value is the most interesting. Do they need a second wide receiver with the way that they orchestrate that offense? Do they need a true lockdown cornerback, with such a heavy zone concept? I look for them to possibly go linebacker, which is something that they have not done in history. I also look for them to possibly take an edge rusher to give them a long-term option there with Brandon Graham eventually moving on. They restructured his deal, which has given me some issues trying to write that in articles recently. But he's probably going to be back for another season. I think edge rusher makes a lot of sense for that organization. Linebacker, cornerback. That's probably the direction that I'm looking for that team.
Okay. No, I'm with you. And I think we all in agreement on that. Typically, I've had Nakobe Dean going, but I think he went earlier. So that's why they didn't choose him. Devin Lloyd would also be an option, I would imagine, even though, as you note, they don't historically take the linebackers. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Chargers at 17, Traps. I haven't taken edge rusher. I think you may have had him taking edge rusher in your most recent mock draft. Offensive line also feels like an option. I don't want to call out Storm Norton, but Storm Norton struggled. Let's be real. So what do you think you're doing if you're the Chargers?
Yeah, one of those two spots, right tackle or edge rusher. David Ajabo. Arnold Ebiketie from Penn State is another name that I think is going to rise up boards. Another kind of David Ajabo type that he's a little raw, but super athletic. Joey Bosa needs a running mate on the other side of the ball. Or if you're just like thinking, hey, let's just try to score as many points as possible. We're this aggressive team with Justin Herbert and Brandon Staley. Any of the offensive linemen, maybe you're getting into the second tier now, like Jackson Kirkland, who you like, Ryan, quite a bit. Bernard Raymond from Central Michigan. I wouldn't hate that. It would maybe be a little bit early for those two, but I'm fine. And I think we're all in agreement. Protecting your quarterbacks, like the second or third most important thing to do as a team in terms of roster building in today's NFL.
18, the last team that has their draft order solidified because they just missed the playoffs here. I had them taking Jameson Williams before the injury. It still makes sense here. But this also, I just mentioned the Browns, Josh, as probably the best landing spot for rookie quarterback. This ain't a bad landing spot either. So if a Malik Willis is here, for example, would you consider that? Would you go in another direction? What are you thinking? Because the quarterback situation is obviously up in the air in New Orleans.
Yeah, I would absolutely consider a quarterback here. As kind of a teaser, I think I've actually got Jameson going to the Saints tomorrow in my mock draft as well. But this is definitely a spot where you consider a quarterback because Taysom Hill, Jameis Winston, regardless of when they were healthy and on the field, or Trevor Siemian, was just not the answer. Ian Book, it's just, it doesn't matter who they've put back there this year, just hasn't been the answer. So, this offseason, I think it's a priority for them to fill that hole. Sean Payton is obviously one of the most desired coaches to work with if you're a quarterback. And I think that would be a very enticing option if you're a rookie quarterback.
And Traps will ask you the same question. This feels like a fantastic landing spot for a rookie quarterback, one that may not be rushed on the field. I could see James coming back actually for a year. What would you do here? I
would really think about quarterback, and especially and particularly Matt Corral. I think that RPO-based wide open system at Ole Miss is somewhat similar to what Sean Payton wants to do in the shotgun, a lot of quick passes. Matt Corral has a quick release. I think to kind of right the ship post Drew Brees for a team that still has a pretty good defense. It is getting a little bit older, but just needs a quarterback to at least bring it close to the level of even where they were like in the last couple of seasons with Drew Brees. You're looking at a team that would be in the playoffs. They just missed out with terrible quarterback play, starting 4 quarterbacks this season. Matt Corral would be my favorite selection.
All right, let me ask you this. One word answer for each of you. Would you trade that 18th pick and next year's first round pick to get to the 10 to 12 range to get Matt Corral? Traps? No?
I wouldn't. No.
Josh?
Yes.
I think I would too. I mean, if you have the quarterback, it solves everything else. I think that's where I'm at on that.
Me too.
All right. You can think about it and change your mind at the next podcast, Chris, if you so choose. All right. That's a wrap on the mock draft show, Pick Six Podcast. Remember, you can subscribe on YouTube and on iTunes and Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening. We'll see you guys next week.